So I'm going to talk about how to operate. So I've watched some of the prior classes, and I'm going to assume that you've already sort of hired a bunch of relentlessly resourceful people, that you've built a product that at least some people love, that you've probably raised some capital, and now you're trying to build a company. So you've been forging a product, and now you've got to forge a company. And I'd actually argue forging a company is much more difficult than forging a product. Basic reason is people are irrational. So you probably all know this. Either your parents, your significant other, your brother or sister, your teacher, somebody in your life is irrational. Building a company is basically taking all the irrational people you know, putting them in one building, and then living with them 12 hours a day at least. So it's very challenging. Now there's techniques for coping with that, and some people get good at it and some people don't, but that's really what operating is about. So basically what you're doing when you build a company is you're building an engine. And at first you have a drawing, literally on a whiteboard, and you're architecting it. And it looks very conceptually clean and beautiful and pretty. But when you start actually translating it to practice, it looks more like this, and you're holding it together with duct tape. And it takes a lot of heroic efforts of people to actually hold it together. That's why people work 80, 100 hours a week, is that heroic efforts is actually necessary to keep this thing together because you don't actually yet have polished metal in place. Eventually, you want to construct a high-performance machine, a machine that actually almost nobody really has to worry about every hour, every minute. And as we used to joke about eBay, that if Martians took over eBay, it would take like 6 months for the world to notice. That's what you want to get to. Or as Warren Buffett says, build a company that idiots can run because eventually they will. So this is what you want, basically a performance machine that idiots can run. Now, as a leader, what is your real job? What's your role? Strictly speaking, there's only one book ever written that actually explains how to do this. It's a little old. It's written in 1982 by Andy Grove. It's quite famous and quite successful. And his definition of what your job is to maximize the output of an organization, your organization that you're responsible for. So CEO is everything, and a VP would be part of the organization, and the organizations around you. So if you're a VPE, you actually are responsible for the performance of the product team too, or the marketing team, because you have influence there. So this is how you measure people, and you want to focus on the output, not the input. The old adage about not measuring motion and confusing that with progress, you're measuring only progress. And this is going to sound like a fancy and glamorous thing to do. Maybe people get excited about managing a whole large organization and being responsible for the output. But in practice, what you're going to learn today, hopefully, is that it's more about things like ordering smoothies, teaching your receptionist how to answer the phone properly, and serving as a $10 an hour TaskRabbit for your employees. So let's talk about that. So at first, when you start a company, everything's going to feel like a mess. And it really should. If you have too much process, too much predictability, you're probably not innovating fast enough and creatively enough. So it should feel like every day there's a new problem. And what you're doing is fundamentally triaging. So some things will look like a problem and they're actually a cold. So they're just going to go away. So somebody's annoyed about this or that. That may be a cold, and you shouldn't stress about it, and you certainly shouldn't allocate a lot of your time to it. And some things are going to present themselves as colds, but just like in the emergency room, if they're not diagnosed properly, they actually can become fatal. So what I'm going to try to do is help give you frameworks for thinking about which things are colds and which things are potentially fatal. So one of the most important things I learned at Square is actually a concept of editing. And this is, I think, the best metaphor I've ever seen in like 14 years of running this stuff of how to think about your job. It's natural. It's a natural metaphor, so it's easy to take with you every day. And actually, it's easy to transmit to each of your employees so that they can figure out whether they're editing or writing. It's a natural construct. You generally know when someone asks you to do something, am I more writing or am I more editing? So an editor is the best metaphor for your job, and we're going to talk about the specific things you're doing in editing.